On the 24th of October 2003, Kathleen Folbigg was sentenced to 40 years in prison for killing her 4 babies. She was labelled a monster and became widely known as Australia's most hated woman and Australia's worst female serial killer. The case was one of the most notorious in Australian criminal history and divided experts, the public, and the legal system for 2 decades. But just last year, in late 2023, Kathleen Folbigg was completely exonerated. Today we're going to examine Kathleen's story and how exactly things went so wrong for her, then take a deep dive into the 20-year-long battle to clear her name. Kathleen Megan Donovan was born on the 14th of June 1967 to working-class parents in Sydney, Australia. Her father was a heavy drinker and was frequently abusive towards her and her mother. When Kathleen was 18 months old, her mother fled the house after a particularly bad fight. Kathleen's father chased down her mother, then stabbed her 24 times, killing her. Kathleen was placed in a children's home after her father went to prison. At age 3, Kathleen moved in with her permanent foster family in Newcastle, New South Wales, a coastal city about 2 hours north of Sydney. She wasn't told that she wasn't officially adopted or that her father murdered her mother until she was a teenager. Her childhood was relatively stable, though there are some reports she was mistreated by her foster mother. She became close with her foster sister, Leah Bowen, and her best friend, Tracy Chapman, with whom she would remain lifelong friends. Kathleen also enjoyed writing in diaries. Counselors encouraged her to pour her thoughts and feelings onto the pages to cope with her traumas, and diary writing became a practice she continued into adulthood. Kathleen left school at age 15 so she could start working. At 18, she met her future husband Craig Folbigg at the disco one night. Craig was 24, had a well-paying job at BHP, and came from a large family, which resonated with Kathleen, who had always dreamed of belonging to a big, happy family. 2 years later, in 1987, the couple got married. A year after the wedding, Kathleen became pregnant. On the 1st of February 1989, she gave birth to Caleb Gibson Folbigg. Caleb was born with respiratory issues and had to be placed in an incubator, and Kathleen was not allowed to hold him at first. After Caleb was brought home, his breathing problems persisted. He couldn't eat and breathe simultaneously and was diagnosed with floppy larynx. The doctors reassured the Folbiggs that Caleb would outgrow this condition. However, 2 weeks later, Kathleen woke up in the middle of the night to find baby Caleb dead in his bed. Caleb's death was attributed to sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, a condition that is still not well understood today. The Folbiggs were reassured by doctors that another SIDS death was unlikely if they had another baby. On the 3rd of June 1990, Kathleen and Craig welcomed their second child, Patrick Allen Folbigg. Patrick started off healthy and strong, but when he was 4 months old, Kathleen found him in his bed, not breathing. He was revived but suffered severe brain damage, leading to the development of epilepsy. Patrick also started to lose his vision, and he spent a lot of his early months in hospital, but seemed active and in good spirits. His resilience became a source of inspiration for his parents, who were determined to give him a happy, normal life. However, 4 months later, Kathleen once again found her son dead in his bed. On his death certificate, his cause of death was ruled, quote, asphyxia due to airway obstruction and epileptic fits. The Folbiggs were overcome with grief, and their marriage suffered. Still, they both desired a family, so they consulted doctors to make sure it would be safe for Kathleen to get pregnant again. They moved to a new home in Maitland, about 40 minutes inland, for a fresh start. On the 14th of October 1992, Kathleen gave birth to Sarah Kathleen Folbigg after another normal pregnancy. Things seemed to be going well in terms of Sarah's health, so much so that the Folbiggs started discussing giving her a sibling. However, on the 29th of August 1993, 10-month-old Sarah suddenly died. Like her siblings, she had stopped breathing in her sleep. The ambulance was called, but Sarah could not be resuscitated, and her death was ruled a SIDS case. Following Sarah's death, Kathleen and Craig separated briefly, but reconnected a few years later and moved to a new home in the picturesque riverside town of Singleton, located another 40 minutes inland from their last home. Ready to start a family again, they consulted several doctors and specialists to help decide whether it would be safe for Kathleen to get pregnant. They were given the go-ahead, and on the 7th of August 1997, Laura Elizabeth was born. Laura seemed to be a healthy baby, but her breathing and sleeping patterns were closely monitored. The Folbiggs got to celebrate Laura's first birthday, a milestone they didn't get to experience with their other children. Kathleen felt a sense of relief. Maybe this would finally be the start of her family. One ordinary afternoon in February 1999, Kathleen took Laura with her to the gym. Laura went to play in the gym daycare as she always did. After Kathleen was finished, she took Laura and met up with Craig at his work to have morning tea together. On the drive home, Laura fell asleep. When they got home, Kathleen placed the little girl in her bed. 15 minutes later, Kathleen went to check on Laura but found her dead. She frantically started performing CPR on Laura, then called 000. 2 ambulance officers found Kathleen attempting to resuscitate Laura on the dining table. They took over, but it was too late. Laura, aged nearly 20 months old, was dead. Laura's cause of death was not as straightforward as her siblings. She was considered too old to be a SIDS case. The forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy, Dr. Alan Carla, found myocarditis in Laura, the inflammation of the heart muscle, typically caused by a viral infection. The week before Laura's death, she did have cold-like symptoms, but appeared to have gotten over the illness. Dr. Carla concluded that Laura's myocarditis was not advanced enough to cause her heart to stop. Her cause of death was ultimately ruled, quote, undetermined. When Dr. Carla found out that there had been 3 other sudden infant deaths in the Folbigg family, he became suspicious. He told police this was highly unusual and shared his opinion that suffocation could not be 100% ruled out as Laura's cause of death. Both Kathleen and Craig were interviewed by police. The couple had separated for good shortly after Laura's death and were not on speaking terms. Kathleen had no idea that Craig had found her private diaries, read them, and handed them over to the police. Craig believed his ex-wife had murdered their children and was helping the police build a case against Kathleen. The diaries contained tens of thousands of words written by Kathleen in 1996 through to 1999. The police got their forensic psychologists to analyze the diary entries and pick out the most incriminating quotes. In July 1999, Kathleen was called into the Singleton police station for questioning. She was asked about her diary entries and cooperated fully with the interrogation, as she believed the police were trying to help her. She did not have an attorney with her.
Do you think Craig's responsible for the death of the children?
No.
Do you know what sort of person would kill 4 children?
I have no comprehension. I don't even want to think about it.
Are you responsible for the death of Caleb?
No.
Are you responsible for the death of Patrick?
No. No.
Are you responsible for the death of Sarah?
No.
And are you responsible for the death of Laura?
No.
Kathy, did you kill Caleb?
No.
Did you kill Patrick?
No.
Did you try to kill Patrick on that near-miss episode?
No.
Did you kill Sarah?
No.
And did you kill Laura?
No.
It slowly began to dawn on her that she was not there so the police could help her. She was there because she was a murder suspect. Kathleen fervently denied having anything to do with the death of her children, but police were convinced otherwise and pursued a case against her. In April 2001, Kathleen was arrested and charged with murder of her 4 children. The story of the mother accused of murdering her 4 babies caused a huge media frenzy in Australia. Kathleen's every move was scrutinized. She was heavily judged for not crying and appearing more grief-stricken, and she was perceived by many as cold and remorseless. Kathleen adamantly maintained her innocence and pleaded not guilty. In April 2003, senior prosecutor Mark Tedeschi, on behalf of the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, presented to the jury the theory that Kathleen Folbigg had smothered each baby in a moment of uncontrollable rage. The most compelling pieces of evidence given were Craig Folbigg's testimonies and Kathleen's own diaries. Craig stated that Kathleen would often get extremely stressed out and angry around the children. He brought up Kathleen's childhood and suggested that she may have inherited her father's predisposition for violence. Craig also remembered the death of their third child, Sarah, differently to how Kathleen remembered it. According to Kathleen, just past 1 a.m. on the 29th of August 1993, she woke up to go to the bathroom, checked on Sarah, saw that she wasn't breathing, woke up Craig, then called 000 while Craig did CPR. However, according to Craig, he and Kathleen were both awoken just past 1 a.m. by Sarah unsettled in her room. Kathleen got out of bed first to comfort her. Craig followed, and when he entered Sarah's room, he saw Kathleen giving the infant a tight bear hug and patting her on the back very hard. They exchanged heated words, then Kathleen threw the baby into his arms. A few moments later, after they had returned to bed, Craig was jolted awake and saw Kathleen standing at the doorway of their bedroom. She began to scream. Craig leapt out of bed and dashed to the baby's bed and found their lifeless daughter. He began to perform CPR. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, but paramedics were unable to resuscitate Sarah. Craig also testified that their fourth child, Laura, was very strong and healthy and showed no symptoms of the heart issues that the defense alleged may have led to her death. Craig said Laura was, quote, full of beans the day before she died, and a video of Laura playing in a pool was shown in court to demonstrate how robust she was. Kathleen's foster sister, Leah Bowen, also gave evidence of Kathleen's aggression towards her children. Leah recounted an occasion she witnessed when Laura had refused to eat her meal, so Kathleen yanked her out of the high chair in frustration. Leah believed that Kathleen did not like attention being taken away from her and showered onto the newborns, and was resentful about gaining weight from the pregnancies. Leah also testified that Kathleen was very upset at Laura's funeral, but changed demeanor as soon as they got into the car to drive home for the wake. She recalled Kathleen saying, "That's such a weight off my shoulders." Then at the wake, Kathleen was laughing a lot and seemed happy. However, Leah Bowen also testified Kathleen was overjoyed with each baby she gave birth to and was extremely devastated, grieving her first 3 children. The prosecution argued that Kathleen's failure to attempt CPR on her first 3 children also pointed to her guilt. Then there were the diaries, cherry-picked passages used against their author. Stress made me do terrible things. I nearly purposefully dropped her on the floor and left her. What scares me most will be when I'm alone with the baby. With Sarah, all I wanted was her to shut up. I feel like the worst mother on this earth. I knew I was short-tempered and cruel sometimes. She left, with a bit of help. Obviously, I'm my father's daughter. These quotes were presented to the jury as proof of Kathleen's true inner guilty thoughts, and at face value, they are damning. Her diaries, which were of course never meant for anyone else's eyes, portrayed Kathleen's many anxieties about motherhood. She wrote about her grief, mood swings, losing her temper, her health concerns, her feelings of guilt, but also recorded mundane everyday events. Kathleen's defense lawyers had asked her if she wanted to take the stand herself and explain the diaries in her own words, but she chose not to. Her lawyers were unaware of the extent Craig had cooperated with police and how heavily the diaries would be relied upon as evidence. They never had the diaries analyzed by psychologists or any other expert. And so, the prosecution was able to present to the jury their interpretation of the diaries, which were the confessions of a baby killer. The medical evidence was by far the least significant part of the trial. In fact, in Justice Graham Barr's sentencing remarks, he said, "A substantial number of medical expert witnesses gave evidence at the trial. It is unnecessary to treat their evidence in any detail." Remember, this was in 2003, before we all started consuming copious amounts of true crime content and understood the importance of scientific and medical evidence. The defense reiterated that there was no physical evidence of smothering or suffocation on any of the children's bodies. Dr. Alan Carla, the forensic pathologist who performed Laura's autopsy, found myocarditis, the inflammation of the heart muscle, but in his opinion, it was not advanced enough to cause sudden death. So he made his final conclusion of undetermined. Other medical experts agreed with Dr. Carla's findings, but not one said for certain that any of the children was smothered or suffocated. Prosecutor Mark Tedeschi used Meadow's law as an argument. 1 sudden infant death is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and 3 is murder unless proven otherwise. He likened the defense's case that all of the Folbigg children's deaths were natural to being struck by lightning 4 times. Even after Justice Graham Barr banned discussion about likelihoods of 4 natural infant deaths in a single family, American pediatric forensic pathologist Dr. Janice Oppoven gave evidence for the prosecution and stated that the chances of 4 natural sudden infant deaths in one family was 1 in 1 trillion. The prosecution also told the jury that there had never been another case in Australia or overseas of 4 infants dying naturally and suddenly in one family. In October 2003, Kathleen Folbigg was found guilty of 1 count of manslaughter of her first son Caleb, maliciously inflicting grievous bodily harm upon her second son Patrick, and the murder of Patrick, Sarah, and Laura. Kathleen was sentenced to 40 years in prison with a non-parole period of 30 years. On appeal, this was reduced to 30 years with a non-parole period of 25 years. Due to the nature of her crimes, Kathleen spent the majority of her imprisonment in protective custody in Silverwater Prison in Sydney. She was mostly kept isolated from other inmates who referred to her as Kid Killer and Baby Killer. She was transferred to Clarence Correctional Centre in Grafton in 2021 and was beaten up by inmates shortly after her arrival. Nearly every day for 20 years, Kathleen would take some comfort in a 6-minute phone call to her childhood best friend and most loyal supporter, Tracy Chapman. Kathleen made several appeals over the next few years, but they were all dismissed, even after details emerged about how flawed the original trial was. It was revealed that one of the jurors Googled Kathleen and researched her, then shared their findings with the other jurors. Some jurors discussed the case with others outside of the trial, including one who discussed the medical evidence with their nurse friend. One of the jurors also had a connection to one of the lawyers on Kathleen's defense. In the first week of the trial, the judge ordered to have some diary entries redacted, but then Craig Folbigg blurted out one of the hidden sentences to the jury anyway. While it seemed Kathleen's own family and most of the public believed she was a murderer, there were many who felt there had been a great miscarriage of justice. In 2003, Australian law professor Dr. Emma Cunliffe was researching the Lindy Chamberlain case, which you may know as the Dingo Ate My Baby case. Lindy had been wrongfully convicted of murdering her 2-month-old daughter Azaria and was eventually exonerated after the baby's jacket was found in a dingo's lair years later. When the Kathleen Folbigg trial commenced, Dr. Cunliffe was immediately interested and felt there were many parallels to the Lindy Chamberlain case. Over the next several years, she conducted extensive research and in 2011 published Murder, Medicine and Motherhood, which argued that Kathleen had also been wrongly convicted. In 2013, Newcastle-based lawyer Isabel Reid took on Kathleen's case, and over the next 2 years enlisted experts from around the world to submit evidence to prove there was reasonable doubt of Kathleen's guilt. In this chapter, we're going to summarize the fresh evidence that was eventually compiled into an official petition. In the 2003 trial, the prosecution had argued that Kathleen's diaries were a sincere insight into her mind. However, it doesn't take an expert to know that diaries don't always necessarily reflect reality. In Kathleen's case, she had used diary writing as a form of therapy since she was young. Then after the death of her children, a grief counselor advised her to dump every negative thought onto diary pages to help deal with the grief. Several experts were asked to submit their opinions on Kathleen's diaries. Clinical psychologist Dr. Shamila Betts in Sydney concluded that Kathleen blamed herself for the death of her children, but that did not equate to an admission of guilt. Kathleen had a highly idealized vision of what a good mother should be and was very hard on herself when she didn't live up to her own expectations. Dr. Betts also pointed out that Kathleen made no attempts to hide her diaries. World-renowned professor of psychology and writing therapy pioneer James Penbaker of the University of Texas, Austin, similarly found no evidence of premeditation for murder. Professor Penbaker's report featured a highly detailed breakdown of Kathleen's voice and writing style. He concluded that she was a fairly average person dealing with extremely stressful situations. He remarked that Kathleen's expressions of frustration were feelings commonly felt by new parents. Regarding why Kathleen rarely expressed overwhelming grief, he observed that Kathleen stopped writing immediately after each of her children's deaths, which was in line with what most diary writers typically do after a traumatic experience. Professor Janine Stevenson of Sydney University noted that it is not possible for a therapist, let alone someone untrained in psychiatry, to interpret the meanings of diary writings. The thoughts and feelings written in a diary are often fleeting and are influenced by the emotions of that very moment. Kathleen had been told that all of her children died of natural causes, and in her writings, she frequently speculated if there was spiritual reasons or a higher power at play, but never once indicated, quote, any active actions on her part that caused the death of her children. Linguistics expert Professor David Butt from Macquarie University in Sydney found that claims of Kathleen Folbigg's guilt based on the diaries were, quote, unsafe, as sections were taken out of context and meanings and interpretations of the words were essentially made up. In the 2003 trial, the prosecution relied less so on medical evidence, but rather on some dodgy, outdated statistics and a discredited legal principle known as Meadow's Law. This principle, named after British paediatrician Roy Meadow, asserted that 1 sudden infant death is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and 3 is murder unless proven otherwise. Roy Meadow famously gave Munchausen syndrome by proxy its name and played a crucial role in several high-profile infant murder cases in the 90s in the UK. One of the most notable cases was Sally Clark, a British lawyer accused of murdering her 2 babies in 1999. Meadow testified that the odds of 2 cot deaths in the same affluent family were 1 in 73 million. Sally Clark was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. However, an appeal revealed that Meadow's statistics were flawed. He had incorrectly taken the ratio of live births to SIDS deaths in affluent non-smoking families, which was 8,500 to 1, and squared the number, giving him 73 million to 1. Even though multiple women in the UK, including Sally Clark, had their murder convictions overturned after Meadow's Law was discredited, in Australia, it was being used to paint a guilty picture of Kathleen Folbigg. In the 2003 trial, Dr. Janice Opovan claimed that the chance of 4 natural sudden infant deaths in one family was 1 in 1 trillion, but she arrived at this number based on Roy Meadow's bad calculations. In reality, statistically speaking, the occurrence of 3 or more natural sudden infant deaths in one family is just as rare of an event as a triple homicide. Therefore, there is no more reason to assume the deaths were murders than natural, according to British mathematics professor Dr. Ray Hill. The prosecution at the original trial also claimed that there had never been another case anywhere in the world of 4 natural sudden infant deaths in one family. However, Dr. Emma Cunliffe discovered that that simply wasn't true and found 8 other cases throughout the course of her research. In fact, in 2007, just 1 state over in Victoria, 28-year-old Carol Matthew was fighting for her innocence after her 4 young children all died within 5 years. Her story was eerily similar to Kathleen's. Carol's first 3 babies, who all died aged under 7 months, were ruled as SIDS deaths. Her 4th child was 3 years old when she died, which was too old to be considered SIDS, so Carol came under suspicion. Police were convinced she had killed the child, however there was no physical evidence to prove there was any foul play. Because all the evidence was circumstantial and there were no medical answers, the Victoria Supreme Court dismissed the case and Carol walked free. Even today, SIDS is not well understood, and clearly it's a difficult area of medicine, so for the law to default to murder when the science isn't complete is problematic to say the least. In 2013, forensic pathologists Dr. Matthew Ord and Professor Stephen Cordner were asked to independently conduct retrospective examinations of the Folbigg children. They both agreed with Dr. Alan Culler's initial conclusion that Caleb and Sarah both died of SIDS, while Patrick died of complications from epilepsy. Opinions differ when it came to Laura. Dr. Carla characterized Laura's myocarditis as patchy and mild. However, Dr. Ord concluded that Laura had an eminently fatal case, while Professor Cordner argued her death had been caused unexceptionally by myocarditis. The prosecution's theory that the children had been smothered also didn't hold up. Laura was nearly 20 months old when she died and had her teeth already, but none of the pathologists, including Dr. Carla, found any signs of struggle or abrasions in her mouth. In May 2015, Kathleen's lawyer, Isabel Reed, armed with hundreds of pages of fresh evidence, presented an official petition to the Governor of New South Wales calling for a judicial inquiry into Kathleen's convictions. However, 2 successive New South Wales Attorney Generals ignored that petition for 3 whole years. In 2018, journalist Quinton McDermott produced an episode of Australian Story on all the questions raised about Kathleen's 2003 trial, as well as all the efforts in recent years for an inquiry. 9 days after the episode aired, newly appointed New South Wales Attorney General Mark Speakman asked the Governor to grant an inquiry. Meanwhile in Canberra, the nation's capital, Dave Wallace, a lawyer with an honours degree in immunogenomics, also saw the episode and got in touch with world-renowned genetic scientist Professor Carola Vinuesa at the Australian National University and asked her whether there could be a genetic cause for the Folbigg children's deaths. Professor Vinuesa was very intrigued by the Folbigg case, as coincidentally the previous week she had worked with another family who suffered 4 neonatal deaths and was able to find a genetic cause for the deaths. Back in 2003, when Kathleen's trial was held, there were only a handful of known genetic causes for sudden infant death. Genetic testing technology wasn't advanced enough for whole genome sequencing, which is the process of determining the entirety of the DNA sequence of billions of letters at a single time, so not all mutations could be detected back then. Genetic testing technology had significantly advanced since then, so in October 2018, Professor Vinuesa obtained Kathleen's saliva sample from when she first entered prison and sent the DNA off for whole genome sequencing. When the results came back, she and another colleague independently analyzed the data and both found a mutation in the CALM2 gene. There are 3 CALM genes in the calmodulin family, and they are essential for normal heart rhythm. Multiple studies in 2012 and 2013 had shown that mutations in the CALM genes are linked to sudden cardiac arrest and heart arrhythmia. This was a major discovery, but Professor Vinuesa had to be sure. Lawyer Isabel Reed arranged to have a urine sample and buccal swab taken from Kathleen in prison in Grafton, then flown to the lab in Canberra via light aircraft. Vinuesa and the team worked late into the night processing the cells and performing the genomic sequencing, then used specialized software to identify any abnormal variants. The results confirmed Vinuesa's theory that Kathleen carried a very rare mutation in the CALM2 gene that had a well-established link to congenital arrhythmia. The next step was to analyze the Folbigg children's genomes. The team tracked down each child's blood spot screening test card, aka heel prick test, and amazingly, DNA was able to be extrapolated from the decades-old blood samples. The children's father, Craig Folbigg, refused to give a DNA sample, but it didn't matter. Both Sarah and Laura Folbigg carried their mother's same rare mutation in the CALM2 gene. The 2 boys did not have the mutation, but they both did have another type of mutation in a gene linked to fatal epilepsy. This genetic abnormality may have been passed down by both mother and father, but without Craig's DNA, it wasn't 100% certain. But what was certain was there was now reasonable doubt to Kathleen's guilt. Professor Vinuesa believed the genetic mutation passed down to Sarah and Laura provided a very likely explanation for their deaths. Although the chances of 2 different rare genetic abnormalities in one family may seem improbable to you or me, to Professor Vinuesa, it wasn't actually so surprising. She prepared a comprehensive report to submit to the judicial inquiry that also included overseas cases of infant deaths caused by a mutation in the CALM2 gene. She believed this would be enough to show there was a clear medical answer for the Folbigg children's deaths. The judicial inquiry took place over 3 weeks in March 2019. It was overseen by former Chief Justice of the District Court of New South Wales, Reginald Blanche. The inquiry had 2 main focus areas: the medical evidence and the diary entries. However, a lot of that information you just heard wasn't actually heard at the inquiry. Firstly, the recently submitted evidence of the overseas cases of sudden deaths caused by calmodulin genetic mutations was rejected. Then, Justice Blanche excluded the psychological expertise regarding Kathleen's diaries. He wanted to hear Kathleen explain her diaries in her own words. Kathleen was cross-examined over 2.5 days, first by a lawyer representing the Director of Public Prosecutions, then by her ex-husband Craig's lawyer.
The terrible things were the killing of your children.
No.
That's what you refer to then?
No.
Stress
not.
made you do terrible things.
No, it's not referring to that at all.
In this diary that you wrote for yourself to vent, I'm suggesting to you that you were showing an insight and some kind of remorse for what you had done, that you deserve anything life throws at you after what you've done with your other children.
Incorrect. I felt that I deserved whatever bad things are happening in my life because of how much of a failure I deemed myself to be.
I'm sorry, I missed your last words when you're ready. Are you able to repeat your answer?
Your Honour, the witness may need a break to compose herself.
Yes, well, we'll adjourn for just a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
So I'm going to try my hardest this time, means that you are going to try hard not to lose control and kill the baby.
No, it is. I just had a belief that I had to try my best and succeed. I was determined to succeed.
You knew what you had done before was wrong.
I didn't do anything before. I don't know why any of my children died, but I didn't kill them.
Your references throughout both of these books don't point in any other direction, but that you killed them and you knew you had, but you wanted to try again and do better.
No, I didn't kill my children. And these diaries are a record of just how depressed and how much struggle I was having and all of the issues that go with that.
Justice Blanche called Kathleen's explanations, quote, simply unbelievable and a pack of lies, and ruled that he had no reasonable doubt that Kathleen was guilty of murdering her children. Kathleen's legal team immediately appealed, citing apprehended bias, and issued a summons calling for a further judicial review of her case. Kathleen and her supporters were shocked by the decision. Professor Carola Vinuesa felt that the complexity of the science had not been properly heard nor understood by the inquiry, so she went to the Australian Academy of Science for more support. She led the global effort to prove once and for all that the Folbigg genetic mutation in the CALM2 gene was pathogenic, meaning it had a 90 to 95% chance of causing potentially fatal disease. Genetic scientists Mette Nygaard and Michael Overgaard of Aalborg University in Denmark successfully recreated the mutation in the calmodulin protein and performed tests to demonstrate the high risk of cardiac arrest. In March 2021, Vinuesa, with 27 co-authors, published a paper detailing all of their research, tests, and experiments supporting their conclusion that the genetic mutation caused cardiac arrhythmia in the 2 Folbigg girls, leading to their sudden deaths. Furthermore, the Australian Academy of Science helped get a petition calling for Kathleen's pardon signed by over 100 leading scientists around the world, including 4 Nobel laureates. This petition was directly submitted to the Governor of New South Wales. A few days later, the New South Wales Court of Appeal dismissed Kathleen's challenge to the Blanche inquiry. Professor John Shine, president of the Australian Academy of Science, publicly questioned the legal system's ability to properly assess expert scientific evidence. Why even have experts give evidence if their opinions are just going to get disregarded? The scientists' petition for pardon sat for about a year. In that time, Kathleen's story garnered media attention, and with the help of public pressure, the Governor of New South Wales ordered a fresh judicial inquiry in May 2022. The The second inquiry commenced in November 2022 and was headed by former Chief Justice of the New South Wales Supreme Court, Tom Bathurst. This time, 3 forensic psychologists were permitted to give their expert analysis of Kathleen's diaries. Genetic scientists Mette Nygaard and Michael Overgaard flew to Sydney from Denmark to give evidence of their experiments demonstrating how the CALM2 genetic mutation caused cardiac arrest. In June 2023, Justice Bathurst released his findings. There was reasonable doubt as to the guilt of Miss Folbigg for each of the offences for which she was originally tried. In his letter to the New South Wales Attorney General, he wrote he was unable to accept the proposition that Miss Folbigg was anything but a caring mother for her children. On the 5th of June 2023, the New South Wales Attorney General Michael Daly held a press conference.
This morning at 9:30 I met with the Governor. I recommended that the Governor should exercise the royal prerogative of mercy and grant Ms Folbigg an unconditional pardon. The Governor agreed. Ms Folbigg has now been pardoned.
Kathleen was released from prison less than an hour later. Although she was officially cleared from the consequences of the offence, it didn't actually eliminate the conviction. The case was then referred to the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal. Meanwhile, Kathleen, now aged 55, had her homecoming at her childhood best friend's Tracy Chapman's animal rescue farm. The two had an emotional reunion, and later that night, Kathleen enjoyed her first home-cooked meal in 20 years, as well as her first ever glass of champagne. On the 14th of December 2023, Kathleen Folbigg's convictions for murdering her 4 children were quashed. She was fully acquitted and officially cleared her name of being Australia's worst female serial killer. Kathleen is now seeking compensation from the state of New South Wales. Her payout is expected to be record-breaking. As for her ex-husband Craig, he remarried in 2004 and had another baby. He tried his best to return to a normal life in Singleton. According to Kathleen, they never spoke again after her trial. In March 2024, Craig died from a heart attack. Kathleen released a statement via her lawyer. There were only 2 people on this earth who knew what it felt like to lose Caleb, Patrick, Sarah, and Laura. My condolences go to the loved ones Craig leaves behind.